Well, welcome all of you. And on behalf of the Association of Iranica in Australasia, I have the great pleasure of welcoming you distinguished presenters, Professor Maziar Behrooz and Professor Elena Andreeva. And also, I welcome our audience to attend. And before anything, allow me to acknowledge the indigenous cultures of all regions of Australasia and other parts of the world, including North America and Canada and elsewhere. Also, I would like to pay a tribute to the Iranian women and youth in their struggle for their human rights and equality. Just a brief word about our association. Our Association of Iranica in Australasia established in 2004 in Sydney, Australia, and our activities were all cultural and academic on the heritage of Iran. And we had some very successful conferences prior to COVID. However, COVID was not a deterrent for our activities, and we had highly successful virtual conferences in 2 successive years of 2020 and 21 with ANU, Australian National University. One year was the theme on music and Persian poetry, which attracted global participants, including PhD graduates from Iran and Europe, and even in part of Russia and internationally. And the second conference was on the theme of Persian literature in 2 streams. The first session was in English, and the second one was in Persian. And we invited some well-known authors of fiction writings in Persian. And since then, we have continued with our lecture series in these recent years, which have proven to be very successful, and we had some distinguished scholars who have participated in this. Now, today, we have the great pleasure of having Professor Maziar Behrooz as a speaker, who will be talking about Abbas Mirza, the Crown Prince of Qajar period. Just a few brief words about introducing both our speaker and discussant. Professor Maziar Behrooz is associate professor at the history department of the in San Francisco State University. And he graduated, and his PhD was in modern history of the Near East from University of California, Los Angeles. And he has authored numerous articles and book chapters and his own publications. The first one was, his first book was entitled Rebels with a Cause, which was published in 1999, and it has been translated into Persian and Turkish languages. And following that, Dr. Behrooz published a history of Rebel with Cause in 2006, and it is a collection of articles and interviews related to the left movement in Iran, which has been again translated in Persian. And his most recent book, which was published this year, which covers basically part of the lecture today, is Iran at War, which has been published only a few months ago in 2013. And it is related to interaction with the modern world and the struggle with the Imperial Russia. Also, I have the great pleasure of introducing our discussant, Professor Alina Andreeva, who is the professor of history at the Virginia Military Institute, and her research focuses on the interaction between the East and West, modern Iranian history and colonialism and culture. And she's the author of numerous books, to say a few of them, about Russia and Iran. The Great Game is one of the publication, Travelogue, and the Orientalism, which was published in 2007, and Russian Central Asia in the works of Nikolai Karazin, which was between 1842 to 1908, Ambivalent Triumph in 2021, and she's co-editor of Russians in Iran, Diplomacy and Power in the Qajar Era and Beyond, which was published in 2018. And also another interesting area of her research is on slavery in the Middle East, and in the modern Middle East and North Africa, which is forthcoming publication. And her current research is focused on and dedicated to Iran in World War II and the Trans-Caspian Railway project. So I welcome both of you, and we can begin with Dr. Behrooz's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I start, I would kindly ask for everybody to switch off their mics so that there would be no noise while I'm talking, if it's possible for you. Hamid and Humayun and Mehran, if you can switch off your mics, please. Put it on mute. Before I start, I would like to thank Association of Iranica in Australia, in particular, Mr. Masoud Roshan, for arranging this meeting. And also, I would like to thank Professor Andreeva for agreeing to be a discussant in this presentation. In modern Iranian history or historiography, particularly after the Qajar period, the events of early 19th century and late 18th century and early 19th century, when studied, usually the evil person, the one who is depicted negatively, is the Shah, Fath Ali Shah. But the heroic person, the one who did his best to defend Iran during those critical years, is usually Abbas Mirza, the Crown Prince and Prince Regent. He had two titles. A man who never became king because he died before his father. So I'm going to, in my book, I have re-evaluated, as part of my book, I have re-evaluated the role of Abbas Mirza, Qajar. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. But before that, let me just give you a general background of what is going on in the 18th century, 1700s, when Iran is going through a very difficult century. In 1722, the Safavid state collapses and it's in a civil war, and Isfahan is captured by the Abdali tribe by the an Afghan tribe led by Malik Mahmud out of Kandahar. And so a period of civil war starts from 1722 until 1736, and foreign invasion. And all of this comes to an end when reunification occurs under Nader Shah Afshar, who becomes king in 1736, and not only reconstitutes the Safavid dominion, but expands it to India and elsewhere. Upon his assassination, his empire fragments. Another round of civil war started that ended only in 1751, when Karim Khan Zand out of Shiraz in central Iran managed to assert his control on parts of Iran, while the descendants of Nader Shah held on to Khorasan, and the Abdali tribe under Ahmad Khan or Ahmad Shah Durrani took control of what is today Afghanistan. In this context, then, Iran, by the end of the century, has lost much of its population and the economy has contracted. These civil wars are very costly. And after the death of Karim Khan Zand in 1779, you have another round of civil war fighting, which comes only to an end by 1796, as the century comes to an end under Agha Muhammad Shah, who becomes king in that year, 1796. The Qajar tribe was a Turkmen tribe from Central Asia. It migrated to what is today Iran, Iraq, and in Syria with the incoming of Turco-Mongol conquests, and settled in Sham, which is Syria today. The Qajar proved to be a good fighting force and reliable tribe, and they became very powerful in Sham. That is why Timur or Tamerlane decided to move them back to Turkestan, east of the Caspian Sea, and ordered the whole tribe to start moving to that direction in order to have better control over the Qajar. And the migration back to Turkestan was only completed halfway when Timur died and his empire collapsed into civil war. And the Qajar basically settled in what is today the Caucasus region and south of the Caucasus mountain range. There the Qajar thrived, and they became bigger and more powerful, to the point that under Shah Abbas, he became worried about their power and decided to weaken the Qajar. So he divided the Qajar into three branches. One branch remained in the Caucasus, mostly around Ganje and Qarabakh and Yerevan, or Yerevan, what is today Armenia, Republic of Azerbaijan. And another branch was sent all the way to Marv to defend against Sunni Turkic raids. Marv today is to the northeast of Republic of Turkmenistan. And in the middle, in Astarabad, where Gorgan, which is called Gorgan today, settled the middle Qajar branch. And it is from this branch that the imperial house rises. The Qajars of Astarabad or Gorgan settled on two different parts of the Gorgan River. Those who settled on the upper part of the Gorgan River were called the Yukharibash, or up the river or up the head of the Gorgan River. And the strongest clan within that branch was the Develu. Those who settled south of down the river were called the Ashaghabash, and the strongest clan within that branch was the Qavanlu. It is the Qavanlu the clan that will be providing the ruling imperial house. The Qavanlu and the Develu competed against each other a lot, and they weakened the Qajar claim on grabbing political power, which they tried during the civil wars that I just mentioned. But once Agha Muhammad Shah, at that time Agha Muhammad Khan, before he became Shah, he was a tribal leader of the Qavanlu. In order to put an end to this fighting between the Develu of Yukharibash and the Qavanlu of Ashaghabash, he co-opted them. As he was reunifying Iran, he made a rule for succession, something that both the Afshar and the Zand had failed to create. That is to say, they failed to create an orderly succession. Therefore, each time when the main character died, Nader Shah in 1747 and Karim Khan in 1751, you have civil war. The succession didn't work. They didn't have a quite strong system of succession. So Agha Muhammad Shah, clever as he was, tried to remedy this situation. Sure. So he had it that only a prince from the Qavanlu and a princess from the Develu and their son can become the heir apparent to the Qajar throne. Now, Agha Muhammad had a full brother, younger than him. His title was Jahansuz, but he had died in skirmishes up north, which, by the way, the Develu had a hand in. He was assassinated. Jahansuz's son, firstborn son, was Fath Ali Khan. At court, Fath Ali Khan was nicknamed Baba Khan. He was called Baba Khan. And once he was chosen to be the heir or the crown prince, he was given a lofty title also. He was called Jahan Bani, the protector of the world. So only, according to Agha Muhammad Shah, only the son of Fath Ali Khan, of Baba Khan, and a princess, a woman from the Develu, can become the Shah. In 1789, that's the year of the French Revolution, right? In 1789, 4 sons were born to Jahan Bani, the future Fath Ali Shah. But only one of them was eligible to become heir apparent. And that was Abbas Mirza, because his mother, Asiya Khanum, was a Develu. This way, the Develu and the Qavanlu would have a stake in the Qajar state. And so they would work with each other, which they did actually. Instead of fighting each other and competing against each other, which weakened the Qajar previously. Agha Muhammad Shah died. He was assassinated in 1797 in the fort of Shusha in Qarabakh. And after a brief war of succession, Fath Ali Khan, Baba Khan Jahanbani became the king. And in 1799, he named Abbas Mirza his crown prince and prince regent. He had two titles. And that is on Nowruz, or March 20th, 1799, when Abbas Mirza is 10 years old. So the coming to the throne of Fath Ali Shah corresponds with Russian invasion of the Caucasus, and starting of the Russians were preparing to start the war. They had, by 1801, they had the Russian Tsar Paul I had ordered the annexation of Georgia, and the Qajars, where Fath Ali Shah was involved between his coronation in 1798 all the way to the summer of 1803, he was involved in internal conflict with those who questioned his authority. But by the summer of 1803, everything is stable. Fath Ali Shah had defeated all his competition. But by December of that year, as the year 1803 comes to an end, Russia launches its invasion, starting with Ganje. Ganje is put under siege. The Khan of Ganje, loyal to the Shah, was Jawad Khan Ziyadlu Qajar. So he was a Qajar, but from a different clan of Qajar. He asked for help from the Shah. The help was not forthcoming. The Shah was not ready. And the Qajar army was just unable at this point, because it was a tribal army, seasonal army, to fight in the winter. They preferred to fight in the summer. The Russians could fight in all seasons. So Jawad Khan was left to his own devices, and Ganje fell after heavy bombardment on January 15th, 1804. And but the Shah now, realizing what is going on, ordered mobilization and appointed Abbas Mirza, who is only 15 years old at this time, the head of the army, to enter the Caucasus and face off the Russian army. Now, you may ask, how is it that a 15-year-old is sent to fight the Russians, or head the army to fight the Russians? Well, first of all, and this is an important point, in that the Qajars are nomadic. The Qajar is a nomadic tribe, and it is trying to become an imperial house, an imperial dynasty, but it still carries over a lot of habits associated with the tribal culture, both in the way they run the state, in the way they manage diplomacy, and in particular the way they did the fighting, the military. So naming a royal prince to head the army, in this case the 15-year-old Abbas Mirza, was normal. It wasn't a big deal. He was appointed key military advisors, commanders, and civilian advisors, and sent off with a 20,000-man army to Yerevan, and to face off the Russians. The battle occurred in 1804, in the summer of 1804. It was a bloody battle, a bloody war. It started at Echmiadzin, which is the seat of the Armenian church, Uch Kilisa, as it was known to the local people, which means 3 churches. The battle was bloody and but inconclusive. The Qajar army at one point was badly battered. They had to push back. Abbas Mirza pulled it back, and the Russian army laid siege on the fort of Iran. And when the Shah arrived with a large force, the Qajar army again surrounded the Russian army, which was surrounding the fort. So there was like 2 circles around the fort of Iran, and the war continued with the Qajars not able to getting close to the Russians because of their firepower. They had much better cannons, they had much better guns, and the Qajar cavalry just couldn't get close to them. So what the Shah decided to do is to prevent any help coming, logistical help, coming to the Russian general Pavel Sisyanov, as he was known, Sisyanov, as he was known in Iran. So this battle, the Russians finally pulled back. This particular battle showed that Abbas Mirza's gives us an early window into Abbas Mirza and his abilities at war. Abbas Mirza was, people who have described him and portrayed that we have from him, portray him as a tall, good-looking person with very sympathetic eyes. He was an excellent marksman and horseback rider. He was very gallant in the war with. In 1804, he proved to be at great risk to his own life. He charged the Russian lines, and he proved to be a very daring commander, but he's still very young at this point. So the Russians pulled back, but the war continued into 1805. And in 1805, the Shah appointed Abbas Mirza the master of Azerbaijan and the commander of the Azerbaijan army. Now, when I say Azerbaijan, I do not mean the Republic of Azerbaijan. That name is post-1918. It is a copycat name, which is okay, but it doesn't exist in 1805. When I say Azerbaijan, I mean the Iranian Azerbaijan. It was the most populated part of Iran. Tabriz was the most populated city in Iran in 1805. Tabriz had 250,000 population. Tehran was around 50,000. And the tax generated in Azerbaijan as the richest province of Iran, of course, helped a lot. So he was named the master of Azerbaijan and the commander of the army of Azerbaijan, and put in charge of fighting the Russians during the first war with Russia. Now, to show you the importance of Abbas Mirza's position in the hierarchy of Qajar state and Fath Ali Shah, the court of Tabriz was called Dar al-Saltaneh, or the royal court, while the court of Tehran was called Dar al-Khalafeh, or the Abbot of Caliphate, which is a bit an odd name for a Shia king to call himself caliph, but it put it at par with between Tehran and Tabriz. It shows how important it was. Tabriz is, of course, is run by a person who has 2 titles. He is a crown prince. He sometimes signs his name as crown prince. Sometimes he signs his name as prince regent, Naib Sultaneh. But he also calls himself the pearl of the sea of royalty, Durre Daryai Khosravi. And each of the Shah's children had a royal title. So for example, Muhammad Ali Mirza, his biggest competition, and his brother who was a bit older than him, few months older, and the ruler of Hamadan and Kermanshah, was called the Dawlat Shah. Another brother who was in charge of Shiraz and Fars was called Farman Farma, and so on and so forth. So he is the crown prince, he is the Naib Sultanate, but he is also the pearl of the sea of royalty, Durre Daryai Khosravi. Abbas Mirza is appointed a seasoned bureaucrat to accompany him and to teach him. He's only 16 years old in 1805. This man is Mirza Buzurg, or Mirza Isa Farahani, who receives in 1806 a title, Qa'em Maqam. We can call him Qa'em Maqam the first because his son, who would succeed him, would also get his title, and he would become the second Qa'em Maqam, Mirza Abul Qasim. But at this point, Mirza Isa Farahani is the chief advisor, chief minister to the young prince, and the working relationship between these two develops into trying to reform the military, because by the end of 1805, the Qajar establishment realized that they cannot fight the Russians with the old military. It just doesn't work. The Russians have a great military. They have an educated officer corps. They have large number of soldiers. You know, Iran's population in 1800 is 5 million. Russia's population is over 30 million. And then it's growing. Russia is growing in size, so they soon realized that the outdated guns and cannons is no match for a better armed and better led Russian army. So in 1805, for example, Abbas Mirza attempted to recapture Ganje, and he went all the way to the gates of Ganje, but the Russian firepower forced him to retreat, and part of his army completely dispersed under fire. So the working relationship between Mirza Isa and Abbas Mirza created a context for, let's change the situation. How do we do it? We have to convince the Shah, we have to convince others that we need better trained military. Now, they did receive some help from Russian deserters who had joined the Iranian side. Now, why did they join? Professor Andreeva can have a better answer, but serving in the Russian army must have been a difficult proposition. The officers were usually from landed families, but the enlisted men and the soldiers were from the peasant families, and many of them decided to basically leave and join the other side. And the most famous Russian deserter was Samson Khan, who became the leader of the contingent that was under Abbas Mirza. They eventually became his bodyguards and his best trained troops. But in terms of training, the quality of the Russian deserters wasn't very high. They were not from high military ranks, and they did provide some training, marching, and other modern drills. But when Europeans come in and they look at the result of the Russian training, they were not impressed. with what the Russians had done. So the idea is, okay, they need a new army, a new force. In the neighboring Ottoman Empire, they had already practiced by 1805, 1806 with a European trained military, mostly by French officers. And they called it Nizam Jadid, or New Order. And I refer to it as Nizam from this point on. They decided to do the same thing. So Fath Ali Shah wrote a letter to Napoleon Bonaparte. He heard about Napoleon from an Armenian traveler. This guy is a great conqueror. He had defeated everybody in Europe. And so he wrote to his imperial brother and asked Napoleon to coordinate with him. We will charge from the south, you charge from the west, and we will crush the Russians, things like that. And Napoleon gave a positive response, and he agreed to send in a mission by one of his close advisors, General Gardain, and sent in guns and training and engineers to do the work. The army of Azerbaijan picked a name for this new army soldiers. They were called Sarbaz, those who are willing to devote their head for the cause. And by the way, even today, soldiers in the Iranian army are called Sarbaz. But by the time the French mission arrived, Napoleon had defeated and forced the Tsar, Alexander I, to sign a peace treaty with him and enter his arrangement known as the Continental System. And so Russia, and by the time Gardain arrives, Russia and France are not enemies anymore. They are friends. And the Gardain mission, which is supposed to train the Shah's army, or the army of Azerbaijan, to fight the Russians, is now hesitating and is trying to make peace between the Russian general and the Crown Prince Abbas Mirza. By the way, the Russian general Tsesianov was assassinated near the wall of Baku, Batkube. So that was a very short-lived, joyous moment for the Iranians, but the Russians then took the rest of the Khanates. They took Shaki, Darband, Shirvan, eventually Baku, and the fort of Shusha. The diplomatic situation is now very fluid, and we have the court of Tabriz under Abbas Mirza very much pro-French, while elements in the court of Tehran are pro-British. And they realize, when the Shah realizes that the French are not going to be of any help, he switches side, and the French leave, and the British come in. The war with Russia did not become any better for Iran between 1806 to 1812. The Iranians could win small battles, but they lost major conflicts. By 1812, everything is coming to a head. By the summer of 1812, Napoleon had decided to invade Russia, and fighting in the spring of that year between Iranian and Russian army is flaring up again. The Russians want Iranians to accept the occupied territories, the ones that Russia had occupied, to remain in Russian hands. The Iranians want Tiflis or Tbilisi back. They can't make peace with each other. And the army of Azerbaijan is being trained by the British. But one can see here again the problem with the military and with the leadership of Abbas Mirza. For example, at one point, the Shah is told by the British ambassador, Hartford Jones, the Shah turns around and says in 1809, what do you think about my army? They were kind of trading. Don't you think this army is capable of defeating the Russians? Hartford Jones says, you shouldn't go on the offensive. You should take a defensive position where there is natural barriers. Your army is good, but the Russians are much better. They have been doing this for longer time. So the Shah basically orders an attack in 1809, which didn't go anywhere. In terms of Abbas Mirza himself, we have evidence that, for example, the British tell him that you have to observe ranks, order of ranks in the military. You cannot have an ordinary soldier approach you. He has to go to his commander, and his commander has to go to his commander, and so on and so forth. And chain of command is very important. And Abbas Mirza turns around and says, this is very difficult for me to understand. What is chain of command? So that tribal culture is again interfering. Another tribal culture that is we can see in diplomacy is that whenever a letter is received from a foreign head of government, be it Napoleon, be it the British, it is read openly to everybody to hear. From the person who brings the tea to spies, everybody around can hear the content of a very important, significant document. So secrecy is not there. Finally, posting military observers and guards around a military camp to make sure that the other side does not raid you and take you by surprise. And in reality, and with catastrophic consequence for Iran, is the Battle of Aslandus in 1812, when these British officers tell Abbas Mirza that you need to post guards in the vicinity of the military camp. He refuses. The Russians raided the camp. They captured much of his cannons, and that was a major defeat for him, which caused the Shah to listen to the British. Now, the British are getting involved in a war in America, in the United States, Canada, United States. They know that their ally Russia is involved in a conflict with Napoleon. Napoleon is going deep into Russia, and they pressure the Shah to accept a ceasefire and accept a peace treaty. The Shah has problems in Khorasan. The financial burden of this war, which started in 1804, we are talking about end of 1812, is just tremendous. So although Abbas Mirza and Qa'em Maqam were against this, and they thought they can regroup and fight back, and they can repair the arsenal which was lost, the Shah decided to accept the British offer, perhaps naively, and I believe naively, because the British told him that we can negotiate with the Russians to get some of the provinces lost back to you. And he said, okay, let's do it. And that is the Treaty of Golestan. All the provinces minus Nakhchivan and Iran are lost, and parts of Talish are lost. And nobody is happy with this. And the Russians are not happy. The Russians have been planning to make the river Aras as the border between Iran and the Russian Empire. The Iranians are not happy, and Abbas Mirza and the court of Tabriz is not happy. But that is the final decision, of course, is the Shah's to make. The Russians did not refer to Abbas Mirza as the Crown Prince. They called him the heir to the dominion of Qizilbash. They didn't refer to Fath Ali Shah as the Shah. They referred to him as Baba Khan, the ruler of the dominion of Qizilbash. And of course, the Qajars were the Qizilbash tribe. These are the tribes that supported the Sufi order of the Safavid state, Safavid Sufi order, and then the Safavid state in the 1400s through the end of the Safavid period. The Treaty of Gulistan recognizes Fath Ali Shah as the ruler of Iran and recognizes his heirs to succeed him, but without naming anybody. So Abbas Mirza is not named in the Treaty of Gulistan. After the Treaty of Gulistan, Iranians realized that the British are not going to do anything, the Russians are not retaining anything, and a defensive treaty with the British Empire was eventually signed in 1814. Abbas Mirza decided now, the team, Abbas Mirza and Qa'em Maqam, decided now we need to send students abroad. We need to bring in modern science. So that's what they did. They sent out students to England. They brought in printing press. Some of the students would become doctors and then translators, and so on and so forth. Neil Green, Professor Neil Green at UCLA, has written a very interesting book on the experience of these Iranian students ending up in Oxford and Cambridge, and what they saw and how they interacted with the British culture at the beginning of the 1800s. They came back, some of them came back, one of them died there, some of them came back, and they did bring about some change. People who visited Abbas Mirza noticed that he had many books in his library, but he couldn't read them because they were all in European languages. He had commissioned their translation in order to better understand what is going on there. And during the interwar years between 1813, the Gulistan Treaty, and the beginning of hostilities in 1825, then he's involved in what I just told you. And then he receives, a new commander is assigned to run the Russian Caucasus from Tbilisi. This man is called General Ermelov. Ermelov is given some sort of an independent command, autonomous command, let's put it that way. He could do what he wanted, it seems. He had a lot of leeway on how to deal with Iran. And apparently his aim was to capture the other provinces left outside Russian domain. If Griboidov, Alexander Griboidov, is to believe, I have a quotation from him in my book, that he says, and he's closely related to Ermelov. He basically says Ermelov is going to start another war if it is left to him. And Ermelov visited Iran in 1817. He was immediately, he had a lot of friction with the court of Tabriz, with Abbas Mirza, with Qa'em Maqam. He was rude, and he refused to recognize Abbas Mirza as the heir to the throne. He communicated with Daulat Shah, his main competition, and he Then he went to Tehran. The reception in Tehran was better. The relationship was better, but he refused to return any provinces. He refused to budge a centimeter or an inch. And he left a very negative impression on the Iranians when he returned to Tiflis. During this period, during this visit, Abbas Mirza tried to show off the military. He brought his cannons out, he marched his army, and he tried to impress Ermelov, perhaps as a deterrence. You know, don't attack us, we have a good army waiting. But other evidence shows that after 1817, the army is neglected. I'm talking about the Nizam army is neglected. There is financial problem, and the Shah has financial issues. He has expenditures elsewhere. The tax revenue of Azerbaijan is hardly adequate for maintaining a standing army, and visitors noticed neglect of the army. Another problem is in 1822, and that is when Qa'em Maqam passes away, and he is replaced by his son, Mirza Abul Qasim, the second Qa'em Maqam. Fortunately for Abbas Mirza, his main competition, Daulat Shah, also dies in 1822. But the negotiations between Iran from Tabriz and Russia from Tiflis is going on. The Shah does not negotiate with Tiflis because Tiflis is not the same rank as Tehran. So negotiations with Tiflis, which is a representative of the Tsar in St. Petersburg, is left to Ermelov and his autonomous office and command. The negotiations from the Iranian side is left to Abbas Mirza and his court. The problem is that the borders between the two states are a bit confused. When Golestan was signed, it was agreed that everything stops where the signature are put on the paper. The status quo will be maintained, where the borders were. The Russians occupied part of Talesh after that, and the Iranians refused to leave parts of southern Karabakh. Therefore, there is a dispute over there on the southern border. And they are negotiating, and these negotiations are not going very far. And as a result, there is an impasse. Another issue is that in Tehran, the chief minister, Sadr Azam, a new chief minister is appointed. The chief ministers of the Qajars up to this time, be it Ibrahim Khan Etemad Dole or Kalantar, who was the chief minister of Agha Muhammad Shah and initially for Fath Ali Shah, and then Mirza Isa for the chief minister of Abbas Mirza, and the chief minister of the Shah. They were all Persian-speaking bureaucrats. They had been providing this type of service to whoever was one of these Turkic dynasties who ruled, be it the Safavids, the Afshar, and they provided this type of services. They were scriber class, they were bureaucrats. And they were still doing it up to 1824. But in 1824, the Shah appointed Asif ad-Dawleh, a Develu, and his own, and the husband of one of his daughters, to become the chief minister. This is very odd at this point to do this. And and he is appointed, and he is it seems instrumental in removing the second Qa'em Maqam from Tabriz. So when negotiations started, Abbas Mirza was left without a competent advisor, and he appointed a very odd person to lead his negotiations with Ermelov. His name was Fath Ali Khan Khomeini. Fath Ali Khan Khomeini was the son of Hidayatullah Khan Khomeini, who was murdered, who was killed during the civil war by Agha Muhammad Shah. His family was taken to the court. They were trained, but Fath Ali Khan was known to be a Russophile, a pro-Russian figure. He was the governor of Tabriz. He worked at the court of Tabriz, but he was, I guess, even waiting for a point, an opportunity to take revenge on the Qajar. He was sent to Tiflis, and he negotiated with Ermelov, and he accepted what Ermelov dictated to him. That is to say, the Russians would occupy the northern part of the Lake Sivan, or Gukche back then, in return for the areas that was under Iranian occupation in the south of Qarabakh. And usually when this was done, it had to be ratified by the Tsar and by the Shah. Ermelov says there is no need for ratification by the Shah. This is it. And of course, this is going to trigger the conflict, the second conflict. In this, even before the summer of 1826, there is a major collapse of authority in Russia. This is called the Decabrist movement or the Decemberist movement. The Tsar Alexander I dies. His son Constantine has supporters in the army. That is his older son. His younger son Nikolai, the Iron Tsar, is supposed to be the heir apparent, and there is a military conflict, and the Decemberist movement is put down. In Iran, you know, when you have brothers fighting, what do you have? You have an opening to invade or to start a conflict. So misunderstanding of what is happening in Russia is part of, not all of the problem. In the summer of 1796, already the Russians have occupied the territory north of Lake Sivan, and the Iranians were left to do, okay, what are we going to do? And Abbas Mirza, and I would like to say a little bit about the role of ulama, Shia ulama here. You hear here and there that the ulama were against Abbas Mirza's reforms, that the ulama caused the second Iran-Russia war. I have found no evidence of them, the high-ranking ulama, the mujtahids of Karbala, Najaf, and Isfahan, to be against the reforms. I have found that the mujtahids were lobbying the Shah in the summer of 1826 to do something when the Russians were reported to have raped women, and they are abusing the occupied territories population. True or false, we don't know, but they were asking the Shah, lobbying the Shah to do something. The Shah was hesitant, Abbas Mirza was hesitant, but there is a war party led by Asif ad-Dawleh, the chief minister, the Sadr Azam, who is pushing for war. There are those who are weary of this. They don't want to start a war. They know that they are not ready. Abbas Mirza certainly knows he's not ready. And the Russian envoy enters Tehran, and everybody is hoping that he can have a solution. He does not. And what happens is that all of a sudden you have uprisings in Shiravan, in Ganje, and in Shaki, and the Shah orders the Qajar army under Abbas Mirza to move in. The war comes to an end with another defeat for Iran, where Tabriz is captured by the Russian army. The Treaty of Turkmenchai is forced. Abbas Mirza is named as the heir to the throne in the Treaty of Turkmenchai, and between 1828 and his death in 1833, Abbas Mirza is involved in sending a mission of apology to Russia when the Russian mission was massacred in Tehran in 1829. His son Khosrow Mirza is sent to St. Petersburg to apologize to the Tsar, and he is involved in fighting Turkmen tribes, using his firepower to subdue them. But in Tabriz, in Mashhad, he fell sick and passed away. He never became king. He was about 44 years old. He's buried at the 8th Shia Imam's mausoleum tomb in Mashhad. Abbas Mirza wrote his will, his last will. He wanted to clear his debt to people he owed money. He sounds very bitter and unhappy when because of his failures. And he also pleads with the Shah to make sure that his son, his firstborn son, from a Develu mother to become Shah, and that is Muhammad Mirza. And the problem is that Abbas Mirza has a younger brother, Ali Zelo Sultan, who is a full brother, but Ali Zelo Sultan is a competition for his son, Muhammad Mirza, but the Shah eventually named Muhammad Mirza his heir apparent before he died in the next year, in 1844. Mr. Roshan, I'm going to stop here. I think I talked more than I should. And I would like to return the mic to you or to whoever wants to take it from me. Elena, would you like to carry from here?
Yes.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. And I have to say, I really enjoyed the lecture by Dr. Behrooz as much as I enjoyed reading the book that just came out, Iran at War, upon which this presentation is based, though the book, of course, is much bigger. I think it's very important to look at the early Qajars. It is indeed understudied period, like as you stated in the book, and reevaluate, address some stereotypes, and look at the pluses and minuses, positives, negatives. If you look at Abbas Mirza, I also very much, I think it's very important to look at the interplay between the center and then the periphery, or the provincial players, if you can call them that. So Moscow, Tiflis, and then Tehran and Tabriz. So interplay between the center and those other cities. And it's very clear here what's going on. So we're dealing with Yermov, and then of course in case of Iran we're dealing with Abbas Mirza. So I also very much in the book, I very much like the conclusion, the 7 points, very clearly stated, and there is one dedicated to Abbas Mirza, when you summarize his strengths and his weaknesses, and many of them were symptomatic of the period, very much so. So I like the way you evaluate his personal qualities and what he tried to do, and looking at the positives and the negatives. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions, but I have three questions for you, if I might, and then we'll open it for discussion. So maybe this will work also to start the discussion. So question number one is this: in the presentation and in the book, you avoid the term great game, the great game, which you see pretty much in every book, including world history textbooks dedicated to the period. So it's deliberate. Can you please comment on why you're doing it? Just because it's a cliche, or there's more behind it? So question number two is this. There is a pecking order in Europe, and Russians, though they like to talk about themselves as Europeans, especially when they're in Iran, they're not quite seen as Europeans in Western Europe, they don't see themselves as completely European themselves as far as self-perception goes. Also in Asia and Iran as well, they are known as Uzbeks of Europe. So there is certainly pecking order, and they're certainly not in the upper half of that pecking order. So they are looked down at by Western Europeans, the British, other Western Europeans, and they know it. So they have a chip on the shoulder. So as far as I know, in Iran also, they wouldn't be under the category of Ferengi, Europeans. They will be in their own category, Rusha, right? So, but that said, after the victory over Napoleon, their status is elevated. Of course, it will plummet very soon. It will definitely go down by the mid-19th century after the Crimean War. But the question is this: is there any indication that Abbas Mirza, when he's dealing with the British and with the Russians, is he aware of that pecking order and the fact that Russia is the status of Russia is low compared to the British? Or maybe it doesn't matter because, well, Russia is so much, well, they're strong at this point, as you pointed out in the lecture. The firepower is strong and it's a bigger country. And of course, there's the behavior, this bullying behavior. Yermol, the way he behaves, it's a bully behavior. The way he behaves in 1917 in Iran. So I wonder if Abbas Mirza is aware of that hierarchy, or maybe it's irrelevant, or maybe it's too early for this clearly low status of Russians. And the third question is, can we try to speculate and see what would have happened if Abbas Mirza survived his father, if Abbas Mirza became Abbas Shah? Thank you. So I think maybe we can open it for discussion. And I suggest, since it's a small group, I suggest that colleagues, you just ask the questions, or if you feel more comfortable with writing them, maybe you can use the chat feature.
Thank you, Elena. Regarding the first question, I always thought that the great game starts slightly later, slightly after the death of Abbas Mirza. That's why I didn't use it. If I'm mistaken, I should have used it. But I thought the great game comes kind of after the defeat of Napoleon, but even a little bit slightly later in the 1830s and 40s, when Russia becomes a major power under Nicholas II, the first. So that's why I didn't use it. Regarding the second question, I think the Qajar statesmen gradually became aware of what is going on in Europe. And they did their best to recruit a European power to help them. But the problem was that these European powers, diplomats, they were making promises and then backstabbing. The French and then the British. The British in 1814 promised that if Iran is attacked, they would pay Iran money, 200,000 pounds, and they would provide military support and technicians and officers to the admission of their own representative in Tehran, Henry Willock. The Russians started the war. Iranians did not start a war. And the British said, no, you started the war, and we are not going to help you, because we would help you only if you are attacked, not when you attack them. A lot of backstabbing. I mean, you see it today too, don't we? Iran signs a nuclear deal, the next president pulls out. I mean, this is our international diplomacy is going on all the time. And sometimes it's not worth the paper they sign. Native Americans, how many times they were cheated out of their land? And they signed treaties and then they were cheated. And so on and forth, the Ottomans and the Chinese, and so on and so forth. Regarding your third question, which is a bit problematic, because as you know, as a historian, I try to avoid speculating about the future. But let's say Abbas Mirza was a reformer of a type like Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, or Mahmud II of Ottoman Empire, or Tanzimat. They went the same way. They became colonies, they lost their territory, and this type of reforms from above didn't even help Russia that much. You know, when Russia had a war with Japan, when Russia during World War I, the issue of Russia lagging behind, the Uzbek factor that you mentioned, was kind of solved only after the crash industrialization of the 1930s at great cost, it seems to me. So other than that, every other country in the region of Middle East, the geopolitical geography of the Middle East, that tried, and they did much better than Iran and much more reformed than Iran, they had the same fate. Either they became semi-colony or they became direct colony of British Empire, like Egypt.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues.
Anybody else? Mr. Roshan, where do we go from here?
I have a question.
Yeah, we open it for the audience.
It's open to questions now.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so thank you, Maziar, and thank you, Mr. Roshan. Very informative. As I look back at the Iranian history, and I look at the wars with the Tsars, with Genghis Khan, I go back, you know, with the Arabs, there's a common trend that the kings grossly underestimate the enemy's power and grossly overestimate their capabilities. Here you pointed out that maybe it wasn't directly by Abbas Mirza himself, not directly by the clergyman, and a combination of reasons they went to war with the Tsars. But what do you think is the root cause of this? Do we have a chip on our shoulder, as Elena mentioned? What is going on here? We have lost territory. We have lost centuries of better life in our country, and this happens over and over and over. Even if I look at last King Muhammad Reza Shah, his 25th century celebrations. What's going on here? Is this in our culture, or what's the root cause here?
Well, if Iran was underestimating the Russian Empire, which I don't think they were, Agha Muhammad Shah was quoted as saying to his chief minister, Ibrahim Khan Etemad Dole, that I am not going to send my army against their wall of fire. This is facing off the Russians. I'm going to retreat, conduct scorched earth policy, burn everything, and attack them day and night like guerrilla warfare. I am not going to go in head-on collision with them. Now, Fath Ali Shah changed that strategy. I'm not sure that strategy would have worked with the Russians, because the Russians began to build forts to supply and to gradually close and get closer in terms of the logistic. They built 3 big roads, north-south, so that they can come and go very easily. Fath Ali Shah decided to go head-on with the Russian army. And if they were unsure about the Russian power in 1804, by the end of 1805, they knew it. They knew they are overwhelming. They have an overwhelming superiority. That is why they start to look for help and look for some sort of training and building the Nizam-e Jadid force. But I don't know about the Arab wars and other wars, Alexander's war. What I can tell you about the Qajar period is that they were between a rock and a hard place, and they did their best. This Iranian culture that humiliates the Qajar and says that they gave it away. They gave away the Caucasus provinces is nonsense. They fought hard. If they hadn't fought, they would be blamed. When they fought, they're still being blamed, and does not correspond to historical fact as far as I can determine. Anybody else?
Yeah, I ask you a question. I have a question. My question is more about origins of Qajar. Qajar, are they descendants from Safavids, or are they from Mongols? Are they from Iran? Are they Iranians? I mean, they were like maybe king of a local part of Iran, or they were from foreigners moving, Mongolians, Turks moving to that area, because you said when they went to Syria and then they came back to that area, Gorgon, I don't know what that area that you said. And also these people, they were descendants of Mongols, and then there were Shia Muslims, and Safavids were Shia Muslims, and Safavids were really a strong dynasty, rich, and Qajar was poor, always problems with Qajar. How did it descend? This parts I never understood it really. I didn't read about it, but I didn't really understand. It was very murky for me. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Qajars were from Central Asia. They were Turco-Mongol. They were Turkmen, right? And they moved into the Islamic world, and they with the Mongol conquest, and they settled in Syria first. There they became Muslim, Sunni Muslim, and Timur, who died in 1405, decided to move them from Syria to Turkestan, east of Caspian Sea, where Turkmenistan is today. And but he died, and they settled in Azerbaijan and the Caucasus region, south of the Caucasus region, Afghazia. There, sometimes in 1400s, the Qajar converted to Shiism and became the follower of the Lord of Ardabil, the master of Ardabil, who was the head of the Safavid Sufi order. So they became Sufi Shias, both. And that's why they were called Gazelbash, because these tribes who supported the Safavid Sufi order, even before they became a dynasty, way before they became dynasty, they were wearing some sort of a distinct headgear that had red coloring on it, and they were called the Redheads, Gazelbash. So that's one thing. That's the origin. And it wasn't just the Qajar. It was the Afshar, the Shamlu, the Azadinlu. There was altogether 7 of them. That's the first thing. The second thing is Iran, the region of Iran, it's a very poor region agriculturally. And land tax is a major source of money. It is very difficult to be a rich empire when you do not have the resources. The Sasanians, for example, the Parthians before them, and the Achaemenids, they had lucrative areas under their control, primarily Iraq, which is Mesopotamia and is agriculturally very rich. That's why the capital city was near Baghdad, Tisifun. But Iran faced a stone wall when it went to the west, and that's the Ottoman Empire. So the territory that was left to Iran is Khorasan, which was devastated by the Mongols and never really recovered. And therefore, even the Safavids, except for a brief period of time when Shah Abbas was in, and he encouraged international trade and silk production and silk exportation, the Safavids were pretty poor too. And they couldn't compete with the Ottomans and the others. The only time Iran became rich is when oil was found. And that is, of course, in the 20th century. So Iran and the territory that the Qajars managed to, Agha Muhammad Shah managed to reunify, and he wasn't finished. He was going to expand and capture Bukhara. He was going after Bukhara and Samarkand, and he was thinking about facing off the Russian army when he was assassinated. But what was left to Fath Ali Shah and what was left to the 19th century Qajars during the Great Game was what they could save, what they could salvage by pitting one power against the other. And if Iran was economically important, they would have colonized it. They won't, Iran was not important for colonization. Iran was important for geopolitical reasons. The British wanted to protect their crown jewel in India. So they wanted countries like Ottoman Empire, Iran, and Afghanistan to be a buffer against Russia, which had the largest army and contemplated walking to India, because they couldn't go through the high seas, could they? The British Navy nobody was a match for the British Navy. Even Napoleon was thinking about walking. He told Garden, look at Iran and tell me if they can maintain a 30,000-man army. That means horses, provisions. Does the country have the ability to support a 30,000-man army? Because he wanted to walk through the Ottoman Empire, through Iran, and capture India from the British, because his navy was sunk by the British. So Iran was important geopolitically. It was not important economically. And the Qajars, playing the two sides against each other, managed to maintain what we have on the map today, managed to salvage what we have on the map today. Otherwise, it should have disappeared. Iran should have disappeared, like Egypt, like India. The only reason it didn't disappear is because the British took what they wanted, but also wanted to keep the buffer.
I have a short question. Of all these wars with Russia, my question is, when does it end? When do relations with Russia become normal?
He was disconnected. Mr. Decker, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You froze a little bit there.
Yeah, so
my question?
Was that the only question? Was that the only? Okay, so Iran's relations with Russia was never very close, even when there was a Soviet Union. And so Russia would again, in my book, I note this, Russia would again attack Iran in 1911 and occupy northern Iran in 1914 when World War I started. The Soviet Union attacked northern Iran in 1920. and the Soviet Union invaded Iran with the British during Second World War, 1941. Be it Imperial Russia or the Soviet Union, Iran had a testy relationship with St. Petersburg and then Moscow. Today, Iran's relationship with Russia seems to be closer than ever because of the Ukraine war and because both countries are under sanctions. And they're coming closer together with North Korea, with China, all of these kind of undemocratic countries are coming together, and
the axis of evil.
Yeah,
axis of evil, so-called.
Yeah. But Iran does not have a land border with Russia anymore. That is very significant. It has a sea border with Russia over in the Caspian Sea, but not a land border. So that had made a big difference. Russia was adamant during the imperial period to capture southern Caucasus, not only from Iran, but from the Ottoman Empire. And it accomplished much of that. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it gave up that. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, yes. Well, during the constitutional revolution, didn't Russian agents help with that a little, help ignite that a little bit, or help with that? Russia kind of egged it on, I guess you'd say.
The reason Russia sent an army in 1911 was because the constitutionalists were trying to reform the financial system and collect taxes with the help of an American advisor called Morgan Schuster. And he wrote a book on this subject. If you want to read it, it's a very fascinating book called The Strangulation of Persia. It was reprinted recently. And so Schuster was trying to collect taxes from people who were under Russian protection, Iranians who were under Russian protection. And the Russians invaded, captured Tabriz, and forced the Iranians to expel Schuster. Earlier, they did invade Iran again in 1909 and captured Tabriz, you're right, and which was resisting the counter-revolutionary Shah, which was trying to capture Tabriz. And they captured Tabriz, but then they kind of let go of it, and then they came back again.
Oh, thank you.
So I have a quick question. I think it would apply to both of you. I appreciate both your comments. But with regard to Russian, the whole concept of expansionism of Russia, would you compare, the ambition of, expansion of the territorial expansion of Russia? Can you compare that with the empire buildings of Brits and Portuguese and others? Because Elena mentioned that there was a sense of inferiority, among the Russians, whereas, was the ambition of expanding their territories, invading Iranian, territories on the same vein, or was it something else?
Elena, please go ahead.
Talk about Russia's invasion. Goes back to Peter the Great. I think what happens by the 19th century and by the mid-19th century becomes very clear for everybody that Russia is just not at the same level. They're falling behind, and the Crimean War is such a big embarrassment. So what do? Well, they turn towards somewhere that we can still pretend that they're strong. So, and that's why they concentrate, well, in Europe, they cannot compete anymore. The Crimean War, 1853, 54 makes it very clear for everybody, including Russian themselves. So they concentrate on Asia now. So they turn towards, well, that's where the great game proper starts, right? So, or accelerate. So that's where they try to compete, because as Dostoevsky say, well, in Asia, we're still Europeans. In Europe, we're Asians. So they want to be European as much as possible. So that's why they concentrate on Asia. That's why, so the Caucasus, that's first half of 19th century. Finally, by the mid-19th century, they pacify the Caucasus. Yermolov played a huge role in that pacification, very brutal pacification of the Caucasus. Finally, by the mid-19th century, they suppress it with very brutal means. And then they exercise all kinds of pressure on Iran. And they also start conquest of Central Asia. So that expansion, they want to be an empire. They want to civilize. They want to colonize. Well, how do they do that? They turn east, and second half of 19th century, a lot of pressure on Iran plus Central Asia. They also, by the end of 19th century, they annex some territories which Iranians consider their own in Central Asia, but Russians said no. It's otherwise, so they got some territories there too. Does it answer the question?
Thank you.
So it's compensating for this inferiority in Europe, so they try to do it elsewhere where they still can somehow pretend to be very strong and scary.
Right.
I would like to add to that that Russia's naval power was limited, and navy was the high-tech of 19th century. If space is high-tech of today, navy was the high-tech of 19th century. That is to say, technological advances happened in naval warfare and naval inventions and innovations. And the British were on top of that game. They sunk the French Navy and they controlled the high seas. Nobody was a match for the British Navy in the 19th century. The Russians had the power of numbers in terms of population, and they used it to subdue a number of countries. Poland, for example, was the biggest chunk of Poland, including Warsaw, went to Russia. Against the Ottomans, the whole northern part of the Black Sea, including Crimea, and the south of the Caucasus, went to Russia. And by the 1860s, Central Asia Khanates, Khiva, Bukhara, they all one by one were captured. So Russia had a better ability to expand with land, over land, rather than in the high seas like the French and the British. And so I think that can be also one reason why they became a land empire.
And I have to add that the crushing defeat was when the Navy was destroyed in the Russo-Japanese War. Because to add to what Maziar is saying, so when the Navy was destroyed by the Japanese Navy, they woke up to the new reality yet. And that's when the first Russian Revolution takes place, 1905, because that was a big shock, because the Navy could not compete. And they didn't realize they had a strong Western empire, industrial empire on the eastern borders now.
Mm.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, overland.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and there's a tension between, are those colonies or are they part of the empire? But that's a whole separate discussion. So because it's in a way it's a hybrid. So since they expanded by land, they're colonies, but also they're part of the empire, unlike the British Empire or the French Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mostly different.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Behrooz and Professor Andriba. It was the most wonderful, presentation and insightful, informative presentation about that particular period of Qajar or period of history of Iran and Russia. And we have learned a lot, and hopefully we can continue our interest, by reading Maziar's book, which is very helpful, as well as, the publications of Elena, which are quite related to that period as well. So thank you very much for your contribution. And also thank you very much for participants who took part. And I wish you all well and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masood. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was really fascinating. Really, really enjoyed that. Having studied art and architecture and archaeology, different periods, and to hear this totally different background, I found very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye.